It is time for the week that was, and in the studio with us this morning we've got the Northern Territory's Treasurer and Minister for various portfolios, Bill Yan. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Katie. Good morning, everyone on the top end.
Great to have you in the studio, and also joining us from Sky News, the Bureau Chief for the Northern Territory, Matt Cunningham. Good morning to you.
Morning, Wolfie.
And we've got the Deputy Opposition Leader and Member for Daly, Dheran Young. Good morning.
Good morning, Katie, and good morning to your listeners.
Now, it's been another incredibly busy week, and I will start off with saying that we received throughout the week a 4-page statement issued from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the Northern Territory. The statement was issued in response to public commentary concerning the grant of bail to a teenager, more than 10 days ago. The statement was no doubt intended to provide some explanation around the decision and, according to that statement, to outline the conventions that limit the manner and the extent to which judges are able to participate in debate about decisions that they've made. It continued that some of the commentary and criticism misunderstands the considerations that the courts are required to take into account when determining whether to grant compassionate bail to youths on remand. The statement was extensive. I read it out in full a couple of times throughout this week. The problem is, I thought the statement raised more questions from our listeners than it answered. There was a number of questions around the granting of bail for compassionate and also cultural reasons. Plenty of people also asking really how often this is happening and at what cost. Now, it was no doubt that the statement was intended to be a context-providing statement, and I think that it was to some degree. It provided further detail to a lot of Territorians as to why that decision was made. But really, a lot of people still questioning how we got to that decision in the first place. Again, I will say it was pretty unprecedented, I think, to see a 4-page statement issued by the Chief Justice. I can't remember it ever happening before, Matt. Can you?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that were pretty unprecedented, because I think there were 2 radio interviews that the Chief Minister gave in the 2 days before that statement that were pretty unprecedented as well. They, I think, were welcomed by large sections of the community. But here on Monday and then on the ABC on Tuesday, she did not hold back in her criticism of the judiciary over that decision, and that is unusual. In my time in the Northern Territory, I don't think I have heard a Chief Minister criticise a judge or the judicial system in the way 𝐸𝐵𝐸 did on Monday and Tuesday, and she was asked as well about whether she was sort of overstepping that line when it comes to the separation of powers, and her response was basically that she I'm probably verbalizing her a little bit here, but that she didn't care, that she was representing the outrage in the community over that decision. When it comes to the statement that subsequently followed, I think there was probably a hope from the Chief Justice, and then there was a statement last night from the Law Society as well, that if people had all of the information, that it would perhaps quell the outrage a little bit. But I think it only made people more upset about what had happened, because in that statement we got more of those facts. One of the facts was that the Department of Corrections had opposed bail.
Absolutely. Because
they said it was too risky.
The risk was too high.
And yet then the Department of Children and Families has said, oh, it's all right, we'll take him, no worries. and then he escaped.
Yeah.
The other thing in the statement, it talks about all the things that the judge has to consider when granting bail or not granting bail. But is the cost one of the considerations? Because this invoice was put to the court. The judge knows that the cost is $7,600 plus for that charter flight. I mean, is that a consideration at any point? Or is it just... Because it doesn't seem that is one of the things that needs to be considered.
Well, and the issue for the department there too, Matt, is that once the Supreme Court judge makes that order, to do this, you have to take that person to this place for these reasons.
So you can't push back.
They have to do it, otherwise they're in contempt of court. So they have to bear the cost. And the Chief was quite right. The Chief was responding to the sentiments of the community. You can imagine, and we all heard the community outrage during the week. And I looked at the Chief Justice's response, but at the end of the day, we all have some personal responsibility. Trust me, if corrections had to take them out and something had to happen, corrections would have been held accountable. If the police had done it, trust me, the police would have been held accountable.
And rightly so.
So at the end of the day now, we've got a judge who has ordered that this take place. Everyone said probably don't do it, the risk is too high. Then this doesn't absolve the judge of some accountability. And that's what I suppose the Chief Justice has come out and said. But we're all accountable at some level, Katie, and we all have to bear that responsibility.
Well, absolutely, and I suppose, maybe that's what Matt and I need to do at the moment, the Law Society having a crack at the media coverage of the way in which this has unfolded throughout the week. I'm not 100% sure which part of it there are concerns with, but what I can say is that, my job is to be a voice for everyday Territorians. That's the reason I get out of bed and come into my office, which is this studio every single day, and the voice of those Territorians at the moment is really loudly saying that they do not feel that the victims' voices are being heard in the way in which they expect them to be heard. Now, I understand there's a lot of different factors that come into play, whether you're talking about the courts, whether you're talking about police, whether you're talking about corrections, Territory families, whatever area that may be. But people are really fed up. They've had a gutful with the status quo. They are not happy with the way in which things are proceeding in the Northern Territory. They expect change and they feel like the Chief Minister's listening.
Well, look, Katie, first of all, obviously, none of us here condemn any of those violent crimes that we've seen over the last few weeks, and especially with this incident. But what is concerning is the Chief Minister did come out and mislead the public with what had happened.
Yeah,
because
in what way?
Well, she had stated that it was the person that had been released on bail was the person that hit that young baby. So I think that was very misleading, and it created fear in the community, fear-mongering in the community. She needs to come out and show leadership and actually get those facts right. But then also to come out and overarch her powers and criticise the judicial system, we need to ensure that there are a separation of powers. Our roles as Member of Parliament is to create law, put those laws through the Parliament, which is then guided by the judicial system, not then overarch our powers and tell the judicial system what to do. We have clear sets of we have clear sets of rules. We have clear sets of rules, and it's showing that your laws are failing.
Is it something that the former government never had the guts to do?
Well, no, we knew our role, and that's what's happened.
Do you sometimes actually need to stand up and say, hang on a sec, I don't agree with this? Do you actually sometimes need to stand up for people and say, I don't agree with the status quo. The way in which this is happening isn't a good use of taxpayers' dollars, and the community expects different.
Well, the way we do that as MLAs, Katie, is that we create the laws, which is then guided by the judicial system. So again, what we've seen over the last few months is Leah Finocchiaro try and distract people from her failed laws. She said when she'd come into government after 100 days there would be no crime in the Northern Territory.
I don't
that
know where
hasn't
she
happened.
said that.
She did say that on radio.
She didn't say to me that there'd be no crime. She said that there would be
after
there would be
100
change.
Days. So that hasn't happened. We've seen pieces of legislation rushed through the Parliament without any consultation, without working with the experts, without putting it through scrutiny committees, and then now she's come out and blamed the judicial system. I think it's we have a basic principle in our roles that we do not interfere with the judicial system and politicise the judicial system. We create the laws and put them through Parliament, which is guided by the judicial system.
Do you think the judicial system got this one right?
Oh, look, clearly I'm not going to comment on that because each individual case has its own set of circumstances, but she did mislead the public.
No, she did. You're right about that. Because, I would like to actually touch on that point for a second because there is a Law Society statement out last night that has criticised the media as well. And I've just gone back and read the initial story that we first reported last Thursday and spoke about here last Thursday. And it does say that that teenager was involved in that home invasion, allegedly, but it doesn't say that he was the teenager who actually allegedly struck
And
the
that-
baby.
that's what-
The difference that the Chief Minister made, I think, in some of her public commentary was that she said that this was the teenager who had allegedly struck the baby, which is incorrect.
And that's exactly right. And when you're a chief minister,
can I
you
say
shouldn't be
that for a
misleading
lot
the-
of people listening to the show this morning, and this has actually been raised with us because I made that point on the show yesterday after somebody had actually messaged through and said, Katie, I don't understand why that teenager's not facing charges of actually, of assault related to that baby being harmed. And we went back and found the press release and said, well, no, the situation here is that young person may not have, that they were not the one, as the statement from the Chief Justice had stated, they were not the one, allegedly, who'd struck the baby. Now, for a lot of people listening to this show, they had said, well, I don't actually feel as though I'm any happier with that teenager being granted bail because they were still culpable in terms of breaking into or invading, allegedly, a
They were
home.
culpable and part of that offence being
That's the
committed.
thing, so-
and at the end of the day, here's this young fella as part of that offence. Did he step in when his mate was wielding that piece of steel and hit the baby and say, stop doing this and get out? No, he participated in the commission of that offence at the end of the day. So in my books, he's just as culpable as the guy that actually struck the baby. In the eyes of the law, he's not, but in my eyes, what did he do to stop that? And that's what I take away from this, Katie. And look, the Chief might not have been right in what she said. She might not have had all the facts at the time. She might not have been aware of who actually committed the offence. But at the end of the day, the fact that this has been allowed to happen, it really, and I understand what Dheran's saying at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yes, there is that separation between the judiciary, but the judiciary at some point in time need to be held accountable for their decisions,
So-
good or bad, because the rest of us are.
And
they
yeah.
can't hide behind the fact that they're a judge to say, well, I'm not responsible for my decisions.
And they have said that. They have said, the Chief Justice and the Law Society in their statements have said that, judges need to be, their decisions need to be, they need to be held up to public scrutiny.
Yep.
And their argument is that you need all of the facts. I think, and you've read out, as you say, several
I've read it
times,
out
the
several
entire
times.
statement. I don't think that when people have been given all of the facts in this case in the Chief Justice's 4-page statement, I don't think that has quelled the level of
Outrage.
about this decision.
It hasn't. From my listeners, it hasn't. Now, I can't speak for every territory, and nor would I ever profess to, but it hasn't.
I think it's actually raised more questions about what has happened.
The statement has actually raised more questions for a lot of people, not only about what has happened, but how often this is happening. So how often is compassionate bail being granted, and how often is the taxpayer paying for people that are in that, like in corrections, in a jail.
When you look at the way the corrections do it, Katie, and I know this, being in there for quite some time, is if someone wants a person to go to a funeral, there is a very rigid set of rules applied and an assessment method done. And so they've got to tick all these boxes before they can even be considered to attend a funeral outside of custody. But the caveat at the end of the day is that the family or somebody has to pay for that person to attend the funeral. It's not picked up by the territory taxpayer. So there's all these caveats done to make sure that the community's safe, the officers are safe, the offender is safe, and then, yes, somebody has to pay for it, and it's not the taxpayer.
Well, and again, this is where that question is being asked about how often, though, when it is a youth who's in youth justice, how often that is not the case and the taxpayer's actually paying. So that is something that the Chief Minister had raised on the show, in fact, on Monday morning. But the other part of the statement that I was quite fascinated by was the fact that right at the end, the Chief Justice actually says, unlike New South Wales, by way of example, there's no provision in the Northern Territory legislation requiring that bail must not be granted to a youth unless the court has a high degree of confidence the young person will not commit a further offence while on bail. However, it must be borne in mind that since the introduction of the New South Wales provision, the number of youths in custody in that jurisdiction has increased by 32%. So people again asking throughout the week, okay, well, do we need to have a look at what New South Wales is doing and do things differently?
Well, we've made some changes to the bail laws already, Katie, and we're seeing a marked difference in what's taking place. Do we need to make more changes? If what we're doing, and I said that the Chief and the AG and the Deputy Chief Minister have been out on radio this week saying the same thing. So we've made a suite of changes so far. If that's not going far enough and we need to make some more changes, well, then we need to look at those and bring those back into the Parliament, because we need to make sure at the end of the day that the community is safe and that what we're doing is meeting community expectations.
Well, again, I would say that to a lot of everyday people, they're probably listening and thinking, wow, I'm actually surprised that if somebody's granted bail, that it is not already a provision that unless the court's got a high degree of confidence that they're not going to commit a further offence on bail, i.e. breaching bail, or, absconding, that they would be released. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of people would be thinking, I would have thought that the court actually had to believe that there was a high degree of confidence that they weren't going to do the wrong thing before they were bailed.
Well, you'd think that the courts would be taking that into account when they're granting bail. They'd be looking at all the conditions, where the person is going to be staying, previous bail compliance at the end of the day.
Well, I think the Chief Justice says in his statement they don't have to have that high degree of confidence here.
No,
I think you're saying the public's expectation would be that
they do.
There would be an expectation that there is that high degree of confidence. Because otherwise, because this is the other part of this story, if you don't have that high degree of confidence, and the law says you don't have to have it here, right? And then the youth in this case absconds, what is the then subsequent cost of sending a police task force out to that community to apprehend him? So we've got $7,600 in the first place for the charter flight, and then we've got question mark, I don't know, whatever it costs. I don't know how many were sent out there. I don't know for sure how they got out there. I presume they flew. What was the cost of flying them out there to apprehend him and then come back? And then it comes back to the accountability of the judge and the decision. If I was in my job and I made a decision that cost my company $20,000, I would have a very, very sore backside if I still had a job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Look, there is, this discussion is not going away in a hurry. And I think what we've also seen subsequently is further eyes. Territorians really keeping a very close eye on some of the decisions that are being made within our court system, and people questioning, some of the sentencing and some of what we are seeing come out through the court. I think that the government have really committed to not wanting things to remain as they have.
We've seen those weakening of bail laws, Katie, over a number of years now, and we're slowly starting to turn those around. We've made that initial change in that first Parliament. There's still more work to be done to make sure that we're meeting community expectations and keeping the community safe. It's a long time, 8 years of things going backwards and things falling in favour of the crooks rather than in favour of the community. So that's what we've got to do.